And so we do actually have a lot of dev time put into like making these custom avatar, or not fully custom, but like parts put together avatars, and then putting the outfits on them. But kind of the more interesting thing that we're doing is the world side of it. So I mentioned that in VR we have access.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Metaverse Degen. I'm Nyan.
I'm Old Man Raptor, and our guest is
Kong. Hi, I'm a director with Studio Penrose.
Oh, thank you very much for joining us. I know technically, for you who don't know, I pulled an oopsie, but thank you for coming back.
Oopsie.
Don't worry about
Oops.
it. I've
You
done
call
that
it an
mistake
oopsie.
before.
You call it an oopsie, huh?
Yes, an oopsie.
Next time, if you're gonna trip over the rug, don't push that button that says delete. Okay, works great every fucking time.
It wasn't on purpose.
We know. I know you did do it on purpose. Well, hey, and welcome to the real world of VR and everything else on the internet. It goes down, comes down, and sometimes bites you in the ass. Everybody makes mistakes.
Well, enough about us. How did you get started in VR in Studio Penrose? Because I've seen you around a lot too, like even down to the FIA's show as well, and your work is fantastic, I might say.
Oh, thanks. So I started filmmaking about 4 years ago now, and I've been making VR films ever since my very first one. That was a terrible answer. I'm gonna repeat that. Pretend that didn't happen. Cut that out.
Wow, we're doing great this morning, folks. We're all on Happy High, and it's okay. It's going to be butt fucking off in the Twilight Zone. Just listen to the ocean in the background. We'll go fishing later.
Bro, if you could see my face in real life, I just like looked and just went like, what? Sorry, okay, let me reword that.
Don't feel bad. It's okay. At least you were like 10 minutes into a monologue. It's like, oh, wait, shit, wrong place to start.
Oh, you sly dog. You got me monologuing again.
Oh, yeah, here we go.
Oh.
Okay, I'll leave a pause so you can cut that in.
Oh.
Okay.
Fair warning about the way we do things in our videos. I don't like editing the content. Nothing against you. Or I'm not trying to make you look bad. I like people seeing who the guest is for who they are, even if it's ahs, ums, because I figure each little thing like that is a good look into who they are as a person. I think hand curating somebody does an injustice when you want to get to know them. At least that's me.
Yeah.
And I do apologize if I put you in a weird spot.
If that was the case, you'd be cutting me out every 10 seconds in this damn thing, me doing stupid shit. So it'd be okay, no problem.
Oh, look, here's another 30-minute segment where Raptor goes on a tangent overdoing the guest making jokes. Time to cut this out.
You want to hear? Yeah. Why? Well, he's thinking. You want me to tell you a joke?
No. We got a guest, Raptor.
Oh, okay. Okay. Son of a bitch. I tried, folks. I tried.
Sorry about that. Feel free to start.
No, you're good. You're good. So anyways, let's reword that. I've been filmmaking since 4 years ago, and produced about over 4 films, though I do like to just talk about the 4 more recent films that I've done. It's quite a journey, filmmaking. I didn't go to school for this stuff either, and so when I started my very first film, I kind of self-taught pretty much everything from that point onwards. Not just through, learning through VR and VR filmmaking, but also by just watching movies and studying a lot of cinematography and just a little ever since that first film.
Wow. So how did you get started?
I got a question. I got a question. Okay, since you started doing filming and stuff like this, what film director do you look as an idol for doing it? Everybody's got some type of idol that kicks you into gear to go, hey, I want to try this shit. Let's go for it.
Ooh, good question. So this might sound a little disappointing, but in terms of real life film, I'm not too, I guess, knowledgeable on directors. Like with real life films, I just like watching movies, and I I kind of remember the movie and franchise more than I do directors. But there was a VR film director that kind of got me started into this, and it was Acme Jack. He was one of the very first like VR filmmakers to produce a more serious film, and it was called Derailed. And that was the very first VR chat based movie that I ever saw. And it kind of got me thinking, oh, like this is something that can actually be done, which I never realized could be done in a game like this. Like you've seen stuff maybe like machinimas back then, like Minecraft machinimas, which are basically just films filmed in that medium, or the game that the film is kind of based on. Like also GTA machinimas are something that I've seen before too. But I've never actually seen that stuff done in VR until that, and that's what really got me into the VR filmmaking.
Oh. So could you tell us about that moment that made you decide you want to get into filmmaking and how that led to your first VR film?
Yeah, so watching Derailed was quite interesting because I had played VRChat at that point for I think a couple of years. So I've been on VRChat since 2018, 2019. And though there was like the camera and everything, I didn't know too much about the technology behind this game. Like I didn't even know how to edit avatars or anything like that. In fact, I don't even think I had Unity in my computer. And so I didn't really know what could be done to allow for filmmaking. There's obviously the VRChat camera, like the normal one that you get when you get the game, but I didn't know about the existence of VRC lens at the time. And so when I saw that movie, I saw all this like focus done and like all this like just basically filmmaking qualities, but done in a VRChat format. And that was why I was just like, okay, this is something that's viable. This is something that we can do. And not only that, but I really had at the time an inspiration to write a story about like just a very what do you call it? Like a fictional story. Because I've always wanted to do that, and I feel like this medium, which has quite a large array of anime type avatars, or actually any type of avatar, allows for an interesting engagement. Because a lot of like games and stuff, they like I mentioned, Minecraft machinimas or GTA machinimas, they're very based on the game, and oftentimes those games don't have a lot of a like customability. And so with this game, we can customize everything and make everything look a certain style that we want. And that's kind of what just immediately attached me to the idea of filmmaking VR.
Okay. So how did your first film go? Like what inspires you to make it at the time, and how much work did it take to get it off the ground?
So my first film, I suppose I should mention this, was called LPD Files, and it's actually really similar in style to my most recent project as well as my most recent film. But LPD Files was started 4 years ago, and the premise of it was about this police officer who, well, is in a police department set in VRChat, set in the world of VRChat, and they kind of get on a bunch of adventures about of a villain that they're trying to track, or rather an organization who's responsible for a lot of, I guess, mischief in VRChat. And the inspiration behind that story was just a lot of us, or rather a group of my friends, really wanted to make a film out of that group, the police group. And we thought, okay, well, we can do something like that in VRChat, you know? And it seems like something that some people may like. We asked around, and people were like, yeah, that's cool. Like, I want to see something like that. And so that was where the birth of the project came about. And for the record, it was my first ever VRChat film.
Oh.
And so when we produced that film, like we didn't really do things like scripting, which is like a really important part of filmmaking. But at the time, it was more so, hey, let's just make a cool video rather than, hey, let's do all the proper steps of filmmaking and like go through the procedure that we should be going through. But the whole point of it was, hey, let's just have fun, right? Like, let's make a cool video.
Okay. So when making your first video, your first film, what did you learn from the process? Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, so yeah.
Yeah. What did you learn from the process that helped you lead to some of the knowledge you have now? Sorry.
No, no problem. So the very first film had quite a bit of logistical problems, but obviously, we had never done something like this before. Like, fun fact for that film, I didn't actually film it.
Hmm.
Rather, I had like cameramen. With all of my more recent projects, I'm usually the main camera person as well as maybe one or two others. But for that film, I had no ability to film because my computer was really kind of bad.
Hmm.
And so, like, it would have just caught on fire immediately if I tried. And so I had a cameraman film, but we didn't really use VRC lens at the time. Or rather, I think we might have used it, but we didn't really know how to use it to the best of its capabilities. And so it was very rigid filming. It was it's not like not like my most recent film. And so, filming was already kind of but also the fact that we'd never like had directors before, like learned how to do directing, meant that film sessions were oftentimes like 4 to 5 hours long, only to get like maybe a couple scenes. Again, I mentioned I had no script with this one either, and so the lines were basically made on spot for a lot of it,
Hmm.
which provided a lot of difficulty as well, because you kind of need like a baseline of like what dialogue you'd want.
Okay.
But we didn't even have that. And so in terms of like making that episode, it took I want to say like 5 or 6 months, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. It's been a while. But even so, it was a really short film and took that long to make.
Hmm.
And so I guess from that film, we learned, okay, we need a script, and we also kind of learned we need to learn how to direct a little bit more clearly. We also learned how to operate the camera better. And after that film, I also got the ability to finally film myself because I upgraded my computer. And so there was quite a bit of development just from that single film.
Hmm. Wow. So may I ask what the difference is between doing a film without script versus doing one with? What are some of the benefits to scripting?
Yeah, so when we have a script, and especially with our more recent films, we go through in detail, well, not just like dialogue, but also camera, I guess, design, like, or choreography, cinematography, and everything in between. And so basically, the moment we get on film set, we kind of know exactly what we're doing.
Hmm.
Like, we want this from this scene, we want this character to say this, and so on and so forth. And not only that, but I'm able to share exactly what I want to my actors because they can look at the script and will read through it. They actually have to read through it to memorize some of the lines.
Hmm.
And so it's a lot more clear what we're doing. And so when we film, it goes a lot faster because it's no longer, hey, we have to come up with this on spot, but rather hey, we know what we're doing, but we may improv. But the whole thing is that we know what direction we're going with and how to do it. And
Oh.
so with that film being the first, because we didn't have a script, we were improvising everything on set. There was no dialogue that we had prepared. There was no even like, hey, we're gonna do exactly this. We're gonna have this character walk to here because again, there's no script, so like I didn't really fully like know exactly what we wanted. And not only that, but my body actors couldn't really see into my mind either. And so they were kind of left up to me to kind of like point people places, and you can kind of tell why that might be a little bit chaotic.
Hmm. Wow. Good to know. Because we've had some chats with people who are big on improv. And I know that's also another thing some people enjoy doing. So it's good to see the other side of that and like the importance of scripting. Um, I remember from the conversation we've had in the video that no longer exists that I thought was quite interesting. You were talking about how between scripting and camera angles you can portray certain emotions. Would you mind telling me about how that works and where you learned that?
Sure. VR chat is an interesting medium. Like I pointed out earlier, there's a lot of benefits to filming in here, and I can kind of talk about that after talking about the expression and whatnot in VR. But on the negative side, there's a lack of certain technological aspects as well. So obviously people are, nowadays thinking a lot about face tracking because there's a lot of discussion about it. Um, and face tracking allows for a lot more expression in the game.
Hmm.
But from what I've seen and what I've actually experienced with, it's not there yet. And so we have to compensate in a couple different ways. So the first thing is the body acting itself. Our body actors, for my recent projects and Studio Penrose, which I work with now, are very experienced with this stuff, and so they know how to express their body in this medium. And because we don't have the full we're like using motion trackers essentially. It's a little harder to exemplify the subtle body movements. Like in movies that you see nowadays, even the most subtle like shoulder lift or I guess stance of a character really helps convey hidden emotions. It's a little harder to do that, but you can do that through body language in this game. Another thing we try to do to compensate is facial expressions, and that's actually kind of the biggest drawback of filming in VR. Is these avatars oftentimes don't have the full range of emotions as well a real person's face would, and so we have to control the character's expressions through our avatar menus. And I can actually kind of show you how this would work. So one of the things that Studio Penrose does that helps I guess increase the expression on the avatars is kind of this weird expression control. So a lot of avatars have hand gestures that when you change your hand gestures, it will change the facial expressions. We actually opt to have these expressions controlled through VRChat's radio menu, which you can't see. But what it allows for is not only just controlling your expressions normally, but allows for transitioning between two expressions. And that's a weird thing that we do, where we put two expressions on a radio control, and it allows for you to do something like this, where this is my normal face, I can rotate on my control, and just slowly like blink, and like slowly control my eyes and mesh between two different expressions. But what that allows me to do is control my eyes and expressions very more like puppeteering.
Yeah.
And it actually kind of it does look really nice in film. It's kind of akin to animation in a way because we're doing kind of that. We're meshing animations for facial expression. So that's kind of the big thing with this expression is controlling that facial expression. And I guess the last thing that I typically amplify a lot and focus on is voice acting to help convey emotion, because we again lack the full range of emotion control. We have to kind of compensate with voice acting.
Wow. How long did it take you to learn all these skills? Because it sounds like from the 4 years you've gained quite a lot. I ought to be honest. I'm very impressed with as much as you know, not going to school for it.
Oh, thank you. So, in terms of, I guess it depends on the like specific thing that we learned. So the avatar thing was something that one of my avatar creators, or also actually a couple of them, back in my previous studio came up with. It was Peach Bite and Invia Waffles, which names maybe have popped up recently in my films as well. They kind of came up with this system for the avatar expression control, which we've pretty much been using on the daily since. So that took about, I don't know, like maybe it came out about a year ago, I want to say, is when we first used it, I'm pretty sure. And as for the like body acting and stuff, that's just dependent on the actor. Lazy the Dino King is my main body actor for almost all my films, and they not only actually have learned this body acting stuff, actually I want to say close to 3 or 4 years in the making is how long they've been body acting. Do acting real life, which helps tremendously with the way they express themselves.
Oh, wow. So how did you meet these folks, and how did Studio Penrose get started, may I ask?
Yeah, so most of the team that I work with now at Studio Penrose, we met when I was part of Metacosm Studios, which is my previous studio.
Hmm.
And the very first project that we all worked on was this long-term film project, which has not been released yet, but will be released under Studio Penrose. It just I can explain the like the logistical aspect of the movie in a bit. We met on that project, and we also worked together on a project called Voicemail, which is the first film that I made at Metacosm Studios. And I guess that was the very first released project that we all worked on together.
Oh, wow. So how did you get into doing that specific project and that first project with Metacosm? How did you meet them?
Yeah, so it actually started with the that very first film series that I mentioned, or first film. So LPD Files was an episodic series. Granted, only 2 of the episodes were finished and released, but I met Metacosm through that because there was a scene in, I think, the second episode where some of the characters from Metacosm's film, I guess, showed up in ours, and that was where our first communication began.
Oh,
And ever since that, when I joined Metacosm to, I guess, make films, I started that film project. And that was where I met everyone else, was we pulled people for that project, and that was where the team originally formed.
oh, wow. So Studio Penrose spawned out of Metacosm.
Yeah, so Studio Penrose was formed about, I think it was like, I want to say late September of last year. And it came about because we wanted to go independent and kind of focus on the content that we were really interested in, which was more universe and very, I guess, like world building oriented.
Okay.
That world building started with the Penrose Protocol, which was the second film that I released at Metacosm Studios. And that film follows these 2 characters who differ in ideologies, one representing lawful justice while the other representing vigilante justice. And basically, they get in an altercation because one is a hitman for the government, and their job is to basically take out their target, which is the vigilante justice's character. And with that film, we not only just wrote the film itself, but also wrote up a little bit of the lore behind the world that it takes place in. And when we finished making that film, and after it released, we gave it some thought and realized, oh, this is kind of interesting, because we not only wrote this film, which kind of has interesting, I guess, lore to it, the world that the film takes place in also has interesting lore to it. And that's when we started writing and writing and writing, and came up with this whole very not convoluted, but very like detailed lore behind the world and the universe.
Wow. So what was the inspiration from that specific film, the Penrose Protocol? What brought that to fruition to as an idea?
You know, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of forgot. But I can assure that at the very least it was film inspired. So a lot of my team members, we just like sitting down together and watching things like movies, shows, so on and so forth. And I remember that for Voicemail at least, we watched a show and got inspired to write something kind of psychologically horror like that film was. And that's why that one came into being. And so I'm pretty sure it was something similar for the Penrose Protocol, where we make a film and then we're like, oh, that's cool. But then we watch another film and we're like, oh, we should do something like that too, you know? And I'm pretty sure that's where it came about. But I don't fully remember.
Oh, that's perfectly okay. It happens all the time. I forget things too. So, question though, what kinds of things did you learn or pick up from the Metacosm while you were with them?
A lot of stuff, actually. So Metacosm was the first studio that I joined, where I was very much like more into film with and the procedures of it, because prior to Metacosm, with the LPD Files series, we were very nonchalant about it. But with Metacosm, I kind of took it a lot more seriously. And so there was a lot of just procedural things that I learned, but the biggest source of like learning from the group came in the projects themselves.
Okay.
Voicemail at the time was the most, I guess, most difficult film I've ever done, because it was a lot more detailed in terms of camera work, cinematography, scripting, and writing, as well as like sound design. Weirdly enough, I'll bring that up because the film is psychological horror.
Yeah.
The sound design is super important for something like that. And so I worked with someone named Scarlett, and she did pretty much all the sound design for that, and that was really interesting to me. In terms of like sound design, that was the most, I guess, intricate of it. But I guess I learned a lot from the films themselves. Like, Voicemail was where we learned a lot about cinematography, and I guess was the first film that we worked on as a team, like, and released.
Okay.
And the Penrose Protocol was where I learned a lot of technological things. Like, the film is about 20 minutes, and it's packed full of a lot of like very difficult things that we push the boundaries on. So I'll try not to spoil too much about the film's plot, but the opening scene is actually a 2-minute continuous shot sequence where a character follows, or the hitman follows the vigilante justice representation character, and that was shot continuously. And so there's like, so for those who don't know about what a continuous sequence is, it's where, visually speaking, there's no camera cuts, and a camera just continuously follows a character or a sequence for a set amount of time.
Okay.
And though that may already be difficult in real life to do because of like obstacles and like trying to, I guess, film a whole sequence for that long is already very difficult. It's even harder in VRChat because not only is it like kind of difficult to operate a drone that long without it being kind of like messing up along the way. We showed a character following another character, meaning that these characters would have to walk. And so doing that in VR, like walking, is very, very hard. And we came up with a really weird way to go about it. So for that sequence, we had our main character walking on a treadmill in real life. And we also placed them on a set path using this interesting dolly system that was developed by someone named Yuki. And basically what it is you set points along a path, and there's this chair, and it will go along that path. But we put a person, or our body actor, on a treadmill so they looked like they were walking normally, and then also put them on that. And so you can imagine that that's kind of a conglomeration of what it took to make them walk that distance in VR. So that's like kind of the one, like a really interesting thing that we learned that is feasible and possible in VR. But yeah, that's just one of the things for that film. And then that film also had a lot of weird, like very actiony stuff. Like there's a shootout sequence that happens in the middle of it, and that was a lesson in tactical design. And then at the very end of that film, there's a 2-minute long fight sequence that is very grounded in reality. And that was very difficult and took quite a bit of effort and work. Our stunt choreographer and fighting choreographer, Crispy Wisp, designed that scene. And I had never done something like that before and directed something like that. And it was quite time consuming because I guess we can talk about like fighting in VR and kind of the difficulties of it, because that is a pretty interesting topic. So normal things that we could do in real life, like giving each other high fives, you know, holding hands or whatever, we can't do in VR very easily. Like when you touch someone in VR, your hand will just go right through them. And so even the most like simple actions they have to be very coordinated. And so when we're designing a fight sequence in this game, it's not just, hey, okay, we're just going to have this person punch this person anymore. It's, we have to have this person punch this person, but time it very correctly so that their arm doesn't go through their face.
Yeah.
And now that is already difficult in and of itself, one single action. But doing a full-on fight sequence for 2 minutes is extremely painful. And that's kind of the biggest and most difficult thing from that film that took a very long time to learn.
Oh, so what did you do, or what does it take necessarily to choreograph a fight sequence like that? Like the two you mentioned, the one where it's like one continuous movement and then the 2-minute fight scene. What was involved in the planning of it?
Yeah, so both commonly they required rehearsals. So with that opening sequence that was a continuous shot, that was a lot of planning more on my part and like the actors' parts where we had to kind of make sure that we knew what we were doing going on set so it wouldn't be like a bunch of just like, oh my god, I don't know what to do, you know? And so we had to do a lot of rehearsals to set up the equipment and see exactly where to place things and set the waypoints for the dolly and so on and so forth. So that was basically the most of that scene. Was just like the equipment and setting up the dolly and setting up like treadmill, make sure it works properly and stuff like that. The fight scene though, that was a lot more intricate. So I mentioned earlier that our stunt choreographer is Crispy, and so they wrote the scene. So they're very good at that stuff. And they know how to do like martial arts and just fighting in general in real life. And so that's how they kind of came up with like that sequence. And so the whole process was they would write that up and write it on paper. I went and took a look at that and helped block it out, meaning that we would section everything like this punch and then this response and then this movement. We would section out. And so I would know, okay, this is a shot, this is a shot, and then this is a shot. And by sectionalizing all of the movements, we would know exactly how long each fight or I guess little sequence would take and how difficult it'd be. Because a single shot of like someone punching another person and cutting after that shot is a lot more simple than a sequence where, okay, punch, dodge, kick, slap, all in one sequence. That requires a lot more timing, and obviously it's a little harder to replicate something like that.
Yeah.
And so by blocking out the segments of each of the, I guess, the movements, I could get a gauge of what I needed to film. And so once that was done, we went on set, and we had all of the body actors that were involved in the scene basically rehearse to the point where they knew exactly how the sequence would go, and it became muscle memory. And that's the most important part. So obviously each character will have to learn like exactly what they do, but not only that, but we'd have to, match it up with another character. And so the easiest way that we found to kind of mitigate the issues of like timing was to have everyone fully know exactly how to move their body. And so on rehearsal, when everyone would gather up, we would then start practicing on each other. Like one person would punch, the other would dodge in slow motion, and so we knew exactly what movement should be happening.
Yeah.
And so once that was done, we kind of were able to get a rough estimate. Okay, this is how to do this. Like this is what we would be doing. And so when we got to the filming day, it became a lot more of a, okay, we're gonna time out these segments and learn, like, I guess the pacing of each movement, as opposed to on the film day we're learning everything, because the rehearsals were really important. And so to mitigate the previous problem that I mentioned of like timing, we use this thing called metronoming. So the body actors would go on set, and our stunt choreographer Crispy would then kind of metronome, and they'd basically build a rhythm. And to that rhythm, our body actors would sync up with it and basically perform their actions to a rhythm. And I mentioned earlier about the blocked segments. They would only need to memorize the rhythm for each segment as we're filming it. And so instead of memorizing like the whole thing and like how to time the whole thing, we basically solidified the timing for each segment on the film day. And that's kind of how we make sure that the timing's correct. And then also on the film day, we, get used to, okay, arm stops exactly here so that this other person's arm could block like this.
Yeah.
It was a lot of practice is basically how we got that stuff to work.
Wow. I can only imagine how difficult it is to do a fight sequence, especially since in VR versus real life, in real life, you have an arm to stop you if they were to block an attack, versus VR, your hand just phases right through them. That must have been a really long process to try and like get down for camera properly.
Yeah, no, it it was very painful, but it was extremely worth it because so obviously when you go through the stress and the like just pain of filming something like this, for the record, we were only able to film on weekends because of the availability of our stunt coordinator. But even so, only being able to film for like I think it was usually one film session every Saturday, typically 4 to 5 hours for this specific fight sequence.
Yeah.
We were able to film it in I want to say like 6 or 7 sessions. That included cleanups,
Okay.
and we learned quite a bit from that, and absolutely do it again, which I'm really happy with. And the way it turned out, watching it on screen was really awesome. Like with the soundtrack that was placed in for it and everything, like the sound effects. Obviously, when you watch like raw footage of that, it looks really weird
Yeah.
because we have to put it in a editing and everything. But like as we put the footage in and then slapped on the color grading and then slapped on the sound effects, put on the music, like it all started coming together. We were like, okay, this is kind of fun.
Whoa.
Obviously, there's still like there's still pitfalls. It's not like perfect. There is clipping in certain parts. But I definitely think that it's a huge step forward in choreography in this game,
Wow.
and I'm really happy that we did it.
I'm glad you did too. It sounds like you've learned quite a lot from that entire process of both of those fighting sequences that will provide you and your team some invaluable knowledge. Speaking of that, you did say something that interested me all was sound design, which brought back to a comment you said back when you're talking about mailroom, how important sound design is to a scene or a film. Would you mind explaining that a little bit to me?
Yeah. So I kind of mentioned earlier that like the medium has a little bit of it has like some pros and cons, right? And obviously we are not one to one to real life filmmaking, and we are not one to one to animation either.
Yeah.
And so I find sound design to be very important because it helps us kind of compensate for that technical side. To make a VR film kind of to the quality level of animation film is quite difficult.
Hmm.
And where we can kind of like try our best, or rather where we can excel, I wanna try to do that. And that's where sound design comes in. When we made voicemail, I mentioned that was kind of a huge test of sound design. It's a psychological horror, and so for those who are interested in horror films and watch them, like you'll notice that like sound design is so important for those films because it helps put you in the it helps immerse you.
Hmm.
And so that took a lot of effort from our sound designer. So for context, she is in school for sound design and music,
Yep.
and so she uses like FL Studio and works with sound design all the time. And so when you watch voicemail, you'll notice that there's a lot of hidden like sound design in the background.
Yeah.
So the premise of that is our main character is basically going through like the equivalent of a fever dream in this world that they are unaware of like where they are and they don't know exactly what's going on. And they start chasing after this one other character who's like kind of teasing them and leading them astray.
Hmm.
And as they're doing that, you hear like voices kind of like spin around you. You hear like kind of weird sounds in the environment that they're placed in. And that's where it's very exemplified that sound design is really important for immersion.
Hmm.
And so that's why we care so much about it. And like for our recent films, though they're not like as important with the sound design, the sound really helps you immerse yourself in the film.
Yeah.
Whether it be like ambient noise, whether it be like even like the subtle things like plates smacking in the background as like a character sets down a plate. All that stuff is really important for helping the viewer get feel like they're part of the film.
Yeah. Wow. So, how long did it take you, or how did you learn the process of wanting to incorporate that into your films and the importance of it?
Yeah, I've always liked sound design. I'm not a sound person, so like I don't know how to like equalize audio or do anything weird like that. Like I am not that technologically advanced. But I do like the details of sound.
Hmm.
And I do it with like all of my films with the help of Scarlett. And I don't know, in terms of how long it took to do that, I've always done that with my stuff. I don't, now that you pointed out, yeah, I've always like really focused on sound.
Oh.
But obviously maybe I got more detailed with it as we went on, and like I put more thought into like footsteps, for instance. Like that was something I didn't really do before in my earlier stuff. But I do footsteps in every one of our films now. I got more intricate with like very subtle sounds, like I mentioned, like plates smacking in the background of like restaurants, and like when you're on a city street, like I'll do like car noises, and then also like throw in like very subtle things like birds chirping, crickets. One thing I did do for my most recent film, Emergence, was basically our main character, whose avatar I'm actually using right now, their parents get killed. And when the first gunshot goes off, I actually cut off like all of the cricket noises in the ambience,
Oh.
to, well, signify, kind of like when birds stop chirping after some traumatic thing, a similar thing. And like that's a small detail that I don't think a lot of people noticed, but like I try doing stuff like that now just for fun.
Oh.
Entirely just for fun.
Oh. Well, I can understand with VR as a platform, it must be really difficult in terms of the technical sides and as well as different techniques to try and do a film or scene, especially since, as we stated earlier, with the fight sequences, there are some drawbacks to VR, such as there's not as much contact, but it does come with its benefits too. I could see, like, unlike real life, there's probably a much more of a financial ease on like making a set, making avatar and costume design, so that you could do what you will, because you use Unity and Blender to do those things, versus like paying a dude to build a house inside real life. In VR here, it's just like throw up Unity, spend some time building it, and at least it's that. But I can only imagine the difficulties to do what you do in order to make it feel as immersive as you can.
Yeah, actually, you brought up a really interesting point. Part of the reason of why I film in VR is actually the accessibility of it.
Mm.
So, I guess a little bit of backstory is I've always wanted to do filmmaking ever since I was like a kid. But unfortunately, filmmaking in real life is quite expensive. Like you mentioned, like you have to like get all the camera equipment, you have to find the actors, and even so, it's very difficult to make a quality film
Mm.
in real life because of just like the monetary aspect of it. But when you go into VR, a lot of that stuff is not nearly as much of a problem, and it's very much more accessible. Like the camera that we use, VRC lens, is something that you can buy for $10, and it has the full-on capabilities of a real-life DSLR camera.
Oh.
That's just like one thing. Another thing is you mentioned like housing and sets. So in real life, we'd have to fly out to get like certain sets and certain, I guess, shot locations. But in VR, we can just switch worlds, or we can have that stuff commissioned and built.
Hmm.
It's a lot more accessible for someone who wants to do filmmaking to get into something like this. And it has a lot of the capabilities of real life filmmaking, but also it does have some cost, like in the sense of, like I said, the fight sequence took a lot of work just to do something very simple, like not colliding with each other and not clipping through each other. So there are some costs. But I definitely think the accessibility of what we do is why it's such a popular thing.
I think accessibility is one of the things I think VR has in spades, is accessibility, especially for people who want to get into a hobby or a profession like filmmaking, for an example. It's like a really big sandbox where you kind of trade the cost of money for cost of time, which I think is a bit more for someone who can't afford like the couple $1,000,000 to build a set and then pay sound designers and actors and costume designers. In VR, you spend more time on that than anything.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Hi, folks. You folks come and join us on our social and on our Discord. We would love to see you there. We have a Patreon, and we have 2 people that have signed on, Training Fangs and Zero. And I hope we get to see you there, folks. We appreciate the time and effort that you make. And my ball's getting out of here because it needs new rubber. Bye.
let's say someone's just starting in the film industry like yourself, you would have to take the time to learn Unity and Blender, learn time to learn the techniques in order to have that specific sequence with the sun coming up over some object in the background at the right time. I can only imagine that it's time that's you got to trade. Nothing is free in this world. Time is a cost as well.
Yeah, that 100%. Weirdly enough, even with time, I think that actually may be a benefit as well. Like to set up, well, you mentioned like costumes, for instance, like makeup and costumes in real life. That's very time consuming, but for us, it's just menu, select avatar, right?
Yeah.
And so we actually save quite a bit of time filming in VR.
Oh.
For those who have, again, watched Machinima and seen Machinima, I think you, or even produced it, I think you can kind of see the comparisons to that, where you go into like a game or a platform and film. Like everything's kind of there for you. But obviously there's a customability factor to it and a dev aspect. And I can actually talk about that.
Okay.
So I mentioned earlier that we have like custom controls on these avatars. And so for all of our films, and not just the recent ones, but like moving forward, we do mesh and put parts together on these avatars and like detail them and customize them. Like this avatar is actually using a custom built outfit that my avatar creator built together and like made. And so we do actually have a lot of dev time put into like making these custom avatar, or not fully custom, but like parts put together avatars, and then putting the outfits on them. But kind of the more interesting thing that we're doing is the world side of it. So I mentioned that in VR we have access to all these worlds, which is great. But obviously not every world that we may need is there. And I'll pull up like a prior example. The Penrose Protocol is a film where we did have a custom like world made. And so there's this shootout sequence that happens in the middle of it. And it takes place in this corporation called Medimax. And the whole set was built custom for that scene. And by building that custom set, we were able to plan out how the shooting sequence would go. And like exactly like we'll have a character like bust down a door in that scene, and then we'll have like this room that this character has to go into. And more interestingly enough is at the end of that scene we have the building just explode, which we had to have a custom world for. And so we're moving more towards building custom locations essentially for our films.
So with you saying you do custom locations in the fight sequence like that takes place, what did you, on the dev side of things, how did you do that sequence, may I ask?
Sure. That sequence was interesting because I had the aforementioned people Peach Bite and Invia Waffles actually write up that scene. So they actually helped do a lot of the direction and like writing for that scene. And what that allowed is because they are my dev people, by having them write that scene, they knew exactly like how to build the world.
Yeah.
And so they not only set up, okay, the characters would go in this path and encounter this person and then gun them down and then move on to this room and then move on to this room and then explosion. They also built it, which allowed for a lot more of a more intricate design of that scene. And in terms of dev aspects, they had to assemble that world from scratch essentially, using I think some Unity assets. Weirdly enough, for those that are more VRChat oriented, if you've played in that Ghost world, where it's like the game, it's kind of like, I don't know what game it's akin to, but it's like you have to try to find the murder or whatever.
Yeah.
In that world, yeah, that uses the same assets that our world used for that scene. It's like this office asset pack on Unity. And so they designed that, but also designed like an explosion that happens at the very end of that scene. Which again, you can't really do unless you build the world yourself. But yeah.
Now, how long did it take you to plan that, like the explosion, and in order for each sequence to happen? And I could only imagine it took quite a lot of effort and sitting down at the teams like, yep, nope, they got to turn left this way. And how big is the world in order to do what you want it to?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember exactly how long that scene took. It was a little weird because it was one of those things where there were two things at once, meaning that while that scene was being written by Peach Bite and Invia Waffles, we were also working on other stuff on that film. And so, because that film also required dev work, that dev work was being performed while we were filming. And so I want to say that the time it took to build the world itself was like 3 or 4 weeks because of the scale of the world. If you were to look at a top-down map, it actually is just straight up a full-on office floor,
Ah.
like a floor plan that you find in like a generic skyscraper, or even like the office that like, I currently work at. And so there was that, and it was detailed with the rooms that were in it because we had to have like office equipment and like tables, elevators, stuff like that. And so it wasn't just like a generic like flat floor with nothing in it. It had like design in it.
Hmm.
And so that took about, like I said, 3 to 4 weeks. And because the people that were making the world also helped write the scene, it became a lot more streamlined in that they presented me the storyboard that showed like in the world where the characters would be placed and like exactly what would happen. And for me, it was a lot more easy to say, okay, we'll cut stuff like this, we'll keep the rest of this, and so it was actually pretty quick to approve that process and approve the storyboard of it. And so basically, when the world was done, we went right in and started filming
Oh.
because we kind of knew exactly what was gonna happen in it. And yeah, no, that filming part actually wasn't really that bad. Like you'd think that like the shooting sequences would be very difficult and very like time consuming, but I would actually argue because of the way that we can do cuts when it comes to gunfire, it was actually a lot more smoother and a lot more easy to do than the fighting sequence. Because like fighting, you have to deal with clipping and stuff, whereas with guns and shooting, you just have to deal with timing. Like this person fires, this person falls, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, that was a lot more fun, or not necessarily not that the fight sequence wasn't fun, but it was a lot more easy to do.
Oh. So gunplay is easier to do than fighting sequences, and it sounds like you enjoy it more personally, from at least how you talk about it.
Yeah, I might enjoy it more from a logistical aspect.
Ah.
Uh, but I do enjoy watching fight sequences a lot as well. But in terms of like being a director, it is a lot more simple to do a shoot sequence or shooting sequence.
Uh,
Um, Still difficult. Like there's still things we have to pay attention to. But I would argue that it is a lot more simple? Question mark.
okay. So I'm gonna ask a question that'll lead into your recent project that we saw at Fia's show, because I was there with you. Fun fact: I was right over one side over with Anticrust and then watching the show with your new.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was actually really well done, by the way. I enjoyed every minute of it. And anyone who hasn't seen it should go in the description, click the link, and watch the video. Do it now. Pause the video, open a new tab, go watch it, then come back.
Oh yeah.
Thank you. So, with everything you've told us you've learned in the previous films and how in depth you got to do it, what led to your current film Emergence, and how much of that stuff translated into it?
Yeah. This is a film I really like talking about. Because of the double meaning behind the name and just the existence of it. So Emergence was brought on after the Penrose Protocol. And so what happened was when we wrote the Penrose Protocol, I mentioned earlier that we built this whole like universe, this whole world around it, and this whole lore behind it. And because of the Penrose Protocol and like writing it and watching it and like watching it on screen, we were really inspired to continue what we did. And prior to that, we hadn't really, well, the current team that I'm working with, we hadn't ever done like something of that nature, like a whole world scaled and like this whole universe for our films. And so the excitement was really there when we started writing characters. And so after the Penrose Protocol, we got together and we were like, hey, just as a fun writing exercise, let's write some characters, like just write some people that live in this universe and like the diversity of it. And through writing these characters, we were thinking and started to think more and more that maybe we should continue this, like write more lore that follows it. And so that's where Emergence came into play. Is we started this universe, and it was also during this time that I went independent with the studio and formed Studio Penrose. And so the team that wrote the Penrose Protocol basically now also work on Penrose activities. And when we wrote Emergence, we wrote it to be kind of a pilot to the world itself. Because the Penrose Protocol didn't actually very much detail the world. It was more like character based. As Emergence allows the viewer to get, I guess, introduced into the world. And so the term emergence is kind of a double meaning to me, because not only is it like the character's emergence into the universe, but it is also our emergence as an independent studio.
Oh, wow.
And the film's creation was done not only for ourselves, but also for the Raindance Immersive Film Festival. And that is something that's really near and dear to me because of just not only the festival, but like what it means. We submitted Emergence to Raindance, and it was just a lot of just fun. This was actually, so Raindance Immersive is I guess we should talk about that. It's a film festival that has ties to the UK. I think it's like the Europe's largest film festival. But they also have this thing called Raindance Immersive, which is like kind of the VR AR side of the festival. And prior to this year, they didn't have I guess category for VR film and VR music video. But this year was the first time that they actually did that. And so not only were these VR films that were part of that festival shown in just like the VR side of it, it also was shown in real life at the London Raindance event. And so for the first time like ever, a full-on like VR film category was part of this festival, but also shown to people in real life that were at the Raindance Festival. Even more funny to think about is the founder of Raindance, Elliot Grove, was there at the festival watching our films. And to me, that's just like a huge step forward to say, oh, like our VR films have actually been watched like at a film festival. So prior to that, VR films have been part of film festivals, but there hasn't been like a category dedicated to them.
Wow.
I'll bring up a really good example of a VR film that has made it big. Joe Hunting's We Met in VR made it to many film festivals, but also made it onto HBO for anyone that's maybe heard or seen of it. And so that was like a huge step forward for VR filmmaking. But it was kind of quiet for a while, after that film. And so now we have this whole festival that has a category for us.
Wow.
Funnily enough, Joe Hunting is also one of the curators for Raindance Immersive. And I'm sure had a huge hand in kind of getting that to be a thing. So
wow.
The film festival was really, really big for us, and we were nominated for the best short film of VR award at Raindance.
Wow, congratulations.
And yeah, and we won that, and that's really like awestrucking for me. Like I never expected in my life that a film of mine would actually win an award like that. And not only is it like an award just in VR, but there's a tangible Raindance award that's gonna be arriving in the mail at some point.
Wow.
And I like smile ear to ear when I think of that. It's just insane to me.
Well, from me, and I'm sure most people watching, the fact that you started off wanting to do a hobby and now look at you now winning awards and stuff, it's a huge... It says a lot about you as a character and your team who works with you. It says a lot about what everyone has learned and got to. So I would say congratulations, and I hope you continue, because from what I've seen of your short films and what you're telling us, you sound very knowledgeable in your craft.
Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate it. So I definitely, this stuff is still a hobby for me. Like for Studio Penrose, and this is kind of something that we've all talked about as a team, like we want to keep this stuff as a hobby, because we all have like real life jobs, and it's very difficult to, I guess, make a full living on stuff like this. And so I kind of find solace in the idea that this is like just for fun. It's also why I stay sane, because like we don't have to rely on like the financial backing. Like we all as a team, we just kind of enjoy doing this stuff.
Mm.
And that also made like the raindance event just feel a lot greater to us. Is like we we felt really happy knowing that our film not only was watched by people in London, but also just we did it, you know? This is a huge step forward for VR filmmaking that we were able to showcase our films in the real setting.
Mm. You know,
And it's a huge step forward for everything. Yeah.
oh, I've noticed like the whole. I've noticed a lot of people from VR chat have that exact same outlook in whatever craft they decide to pick up. It seems to be like one of the biggest things I've found that VR chat as like a personality trait is immensely common, and I'm glad it has that. It makes the whole experience, whether you're watching short films or going to someone's VR club, raving away with Patrick's and SpongeBob's, a lot more enjoyable knowing that you're amongst people who want to be there as much as you. It doesn't feel like you're among people who are trying to meet a deadline in order to push a thing. I enjoyed that personality trait of VR. It's one of the things I have found to be the most enjoyable thing to hear from people like yourself when you do your work and do your craft. I'm glad there are people out there that do it for the enjoyment of it, and it definitely shows in the work because there's a quote I say a couple of times, but I was in a hospital getting stuff done, and an old gentleman in a seat next to me told me, if you enjoy what you do, you never work a day in your life. And obviously, by everyone here, including yourself, it doesn't feel like anyone feels like they're working at all. It doesn't feel like you're like a 9 to 5 in some real studio trying to push a deadline to get a scene done where everyone hates life. From what it sounds from you, it seems like everyone does genuine joy being there. And I want to say congratulations on all the work in your work, and I hope your spirit here never dies. I generally hope it doesn't.
Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, that's a great point. So Raindance also not only taught me that like VR chat films could make it outside of the medium, but exactly what you mentioned. It was not just, about like our film. It was a film festival of like a showcase of other people's works. And one of the things I really loved seeing and hearing was the passion behind all these projects. Like, so I tried to attend as many, I guess, screenings as I could at that event. And every single person there that was talking about their works, it helped me feel really inspired knowing that there were other people that were doing this stuff for passion, like you said. And it is a very common VR chat thing to see a lot of people do what they do in this game for passion, and because they enjoy it. And it helps reassure you as a content creator that there's a fun aspect in this stuff. With the studio and Penrose, and I guess going independent with it all, and working with my team for so long, it's been a lot of just fun. Like a lot of just, hey, we do this stuff because we enjoy it. Hey, we like really like this film and we're really happy to see it on the screen. And that reminds me that like, yeah, we do stuff for fun.
Mm.
Like we're not trying to make money out of it. We're not trying to like conform to a studio's like deadlines. And like you said, we're not like overworked gamers essentially and game creators, which, oh man, I'm very happy about.
Yeah. So, leading back to your film Emergence, which you there, pause the video, go watch now. I know you didn't do it. You don't backsass me, go watch it. So, so back to Emergence. How much world building did it take you to do in that? Because from when you touched on it a bit, that you spent a large time making lore for the world before the film. At what point in world building led to the story of Emergence? And for those who didn't watch the short film, what is like the start that explains? Yeah.
Sure. So the so the lore definitely started with the Penrose Protocol. And just to give a little context, because it is relevant in Emergence, the word Penrose and protocol is actually never said in the Penrose Protocol, and that's kind of a hint to what's to come here. So in that film, like I mentioned, we have a hitman following a target. So the target is part of this vigilante justice group called Cassandra, and the target's name is Lilith. And the main protagonist's name is April, and she's part of what's called Penrose Intelligence, which is basically the equivalent of like the CIA or FBI in this universe, but a little bit more in the dirty tactics side. Um, but so that's kind of the lore that was started in that film was okay. There's this organization that engages in terroristic acts, and then there's this FBI-ish type organization as well. And all this takes place in the city of New Millennia, which is our cinematic universe. And as the name may imply, the city is very much like a play on New York City,
Yeah.
but more technologically advanced, and you'll see like different species of people in there. Because like we have like furries, we have like Neckos and stuff. It's a very like VRChat-ish rendition of New York, and so
Okay.
that's like kind of the setup that is led into Emergence. And so Emergence follows the character Lucina Mai as she's in her home on some random day in the city of Crescent City. So it's not New Millennia is where it starts. Um, and in the film, she kind of gets, I guess, nagged by her parents about how she needs to find a job. She needs to like kind of move on past graduation because she, went to college and graduated. And I wrote this scene because it's very personal to me. The idea of like unknown and like job hunting after college. And this will be a very common, I guess, thing moving forward with our films is the characters are more than likely going to be around like the ages of like early 20s. Because I really want to focus on that era of like a person's life. Just as a slight like tangent, you often see a lot of like movies with characters that are in their teenage years or like movies of like adults. But there feels to be like this kind of neglected age range of like 20 to 25 where a person graduates from college and moves into the job sphere. And that's exactly what I want to focus on. And so with Emergence, that's what opens up the film. And we know our main character is kind of like unsure what they want to do. But it's also shown that they're talking to someone named Kane. And Kane is going to be a character that becomes very important not only in Emergence but the following series, and I can talk about that after Emergence if you'd like.
Oh no, I would love to hear all about it because I was like, sorry to interrupt your little tangent, but the way the film ended, if you watched it, was it seemed like you were leading on to there'll be more.
Yeah. So, in the beginning, Lucina's parents are immediately killed, and it's unknown exactly who killed them. But we know that Lucina Mai, who's the main character, witnessed it all. And so after that, she leaves her home and moves to the city of New Millennia, which is why I mentioned earlier that this is kind of like the audience's introduction to the cities, because it's also the character's introduction to the city. And as she enters the city, she sees a lot of like people, a lot of liveliness, something that she's not very used to, because it's kind of implied that she's like a little bit of a shut-in and still kind of learning to move on from college and find a job and whatnot. And so she's just like suddenly thrown into this whole world. And she goes to this underground bar to meet this character Kane, who we are introduced to as a person who's part of Penrose Intelligence and kind of a recruiter for them. In the first interaction that she has with him, it's shown that she's really like closed off, very like kind of like she doesn't want to talk to him. And it's evident when he first goes into like almost give her a hug, she like steps back, right? Implying that there's like something kind of hidden and going on with him. And as to not spoil the rest of it, she finds out kind of who the intruder who killed her parents is connected to, and that sets up the whole series that we're working on.
Oh, wow. So sorry, I'm a person who enjoys technicals, so I may jump into technicals of your short film before we lead into the longer form series. With that scene you mentioned, the whole hesitation and stuff, how much camera tricks and work and everything you've described prior helps you portray that specific emotion and scene between them?
Yeah. So that scene is actually one of the examples of utilizing like all of our strengths in VR filmmaking. And it's with body acting, it's with the expression control, and it's also with cinematography. So when I mentioned that the main character kind of recoils or steps back when our antagonist, or rather, maybe I shouldn't have said antagonist, but Kane tries to approach her. Like it's stuff like that that we have to kind of write into the script that allows for more like character emotion. And so she recoils, she sits down with him, and they talk. And it's during this conversation that cinematography also comes into play because of the way we frame these characters. Like specifically with like Kane, our framing's very like close up. It's very like aggressive, and it also showcases his like smaller expressions. If you look in the film, you'll like see the way he looks. He squints his eyes after saying certain things. The voice acting also conveys a little bit of tension, and again with the body acting, that's very much apparent as well, as Lucina kind of just sits like slouched and slumped, and so on and so forth. This scene also kind of relates to Protocol because the Penrose Protocol also had this huge, or very not huge, but like long dialogue sequence where two characters who don't see eye to eye are talking together, and that scene is actually a little bit more detailed in my opinion. About the like whole cinematography side of like showing tension, showing characters that don't agree. I guess I can talk a little bit about that because that's a fun one. So our character April from that film and Lilith are on a train after confronting, and April represents lawful justice while Lilith represents vigilante justice, and so they do not see eye to eye in any capacity. In fact, as they talk, they don't listen to each other, and it becomes like a brick wall talking to a brick wall. Because the film is from the viewpoint of April Larson, we learn a lot more about her and see kind of her conflicts because she was a former police officer, now doing this stuff for Penrose Intelligence. And when she was a police officer, it was shown that she made the wrong, essentially, decision in that shootout sequence that led to the death of someone who was close to her, the executive for Medimax, who explodes in that scene. And so we know that the character's racked with guilt and racked with a lot of conflict, but because of all the events in her life, she's had a lot of reflection on everything. Granted, it led her to a vengeful sort of personality. And because of that reflective aspect of her, and because the viewer is able to see into her mind more, we place her in front of the window on the train, where you can see her reflection at all points. But the other character, Lilith, who represents vigilante justice, we don't know much about her, and she's very like close-minded and very much unable to see the full story and full picture. And so Lilith brings up the actual incident that April is part of, where the Medimax executive company executive is killed in that explosion. And she says this very like kind of close-minded and ignorant viewpoint that this guy was an asshole. This guy was like, you know, just in it for the money and whatever. But April retorts and says, no, that is not who he is, because she knows him. And because of this kind of close-minded back and forth, we put Lilith in front of a literal wall. You don't see her reflection at all in the cinematography of that scene. She sits in front of this wooden part of the train where there is no window, there is no reflection. And there's actually a shot in that sequence where we have the camera slowly zooming in from behind both of them that shows April in this reflection that shows Lilith in this brick wall, essentially. And so like something like that is how we convey this tension, convey this lack of understanding through film. And stuff like that is actually like my favorite thing to do. Like I am more of a cinematographer and director than I am like knowledgeable in voice acting, than I am with like body acting, and I rely a lot of on my team to help me with that stuff. But like when it comes to camera design and like shot design, that's where I really like that. And that's what allows us to kind of compare ourselves to real life film. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So at one point in your film career, like in VRChat film, did you figure out you enjoy that aspect of making films?
From the very beginning, I didn't have the ability to film back then, like I mentioned, because of my computer and its slowness and inability to do anything. But the minute I was able to pick up a camera, I loved it. Like, I really love designing shots. I'm a photographer in real life, and so that's usually what I actually do. I don't do film in real life. I take pictures. And so composition and like design and all sort of stuff is stuff that I'm very like intrinsically like I guess minded to do.
Hmm.
And so I've always liked that stuff.
Oh, wow. So a lot of your real life career as a photographer leaks into your hobby as well. May I ask what kinds of things are translatable between the filmography of VR versus filmography of real life?
Believe it or not, quite a bit. Just in terms of like a generic technical side, like I learned or from photography I've learned like how to frame things like 3/4 composition, 2/3. I already butchered that. I don't remember if it's 2/3, 3/4. I just look at things and like do them. But like design of the frames, just like I'm able to very much when I see like a cool shot, like I absolutely think, okay, we got to do this. Even just like walking around in worlds in VR and like seeing stuff, I'm like, oh wait, that's cool. I want to film it like this. As an example, just moving like a little bit in a future example, there's a world that we're going to use for a sequence in our upcoming series, and just like seeing the layout of the streets and I guess the buildings, I was like, okay, I know exactly I want to have the camera do this.
Hmm.
And so like that's kind of like my eyes like focusing on environment and being able to frame something from it.
Hmm. So how how quickly going into a world or seeing a scene do you immediately start thinking, oh, character there, this there, camera there? How quickly does it take you to look at a scene and plan it out?
Immediately. Like the second we load into worlds, I'm usually like, oh, like this is kind of cool. Oh, this is kind of cool. And it's I don't know, just that stuff kind of comes naturally to me, and I'm really happy because that's like something that's a little harder to teach is
Hmm.
like shot composition and like framing design and stuff like that. And I don't know, I see that stuff very like easily.
Hmm. Okay. So with you now, let's go back to the thing you want to talk about earlier, the long series that you have going. Uh, how long did it take you to plan that out, and what is the idea for your that you want to portray with the series without like giving too much away?
Yeah. So I think I've talked about this before, so I can give some stuff away.
Okay.
Um, the series is basically Studio Penrose's bread and butter. It
Hmm.
is going to be like part of our 2-year plan and basically the thing that we focus on for the next 2 years.
Hmm.
But to simplify it, Emergence is the introduction to the world, and we know that from Emergence that there does exist the Penrose intelligence, I guess, organization. Cassandra's part of it, and Lucina Mai is someone who's very deeply connected with all of that. And so the series will follow her journey, but also introducing quite a lot of world and characters to it. Um, Basically, in summary, the series follows 4 groups of main characters as they interact with the city around them, New Millennia. And there's a lot of writing to do with, like, obviously Penrose intelligence, but also Cassandra will be very much displayed in the series. The government structure will be conveyed in the series, and there will be some very interesting antagonists to it. And to answer your question about like where we're at and like when it's released and stuff like that, we're actually in the major writing stage right now,
Ooh.
where we're still writing the overall like concept of the series and like the storyboard and timeline of the series. But we're almost to the scripting phase, weirdly enough. And so we've already developed like the major plot points, the antagonists, the characters, the villains, and all that sort of stuff. And pretty soon here we're gonna get into scripting. And because the series is our bread and butter, we're putting a lot of effort into it. Like we're gonna design custom worlds for it, as I've mentioned too. A lot of this will be like very much world building worlds, as in like will help the viewer, I guess, immerse themselves in the world. And these worlds will also have a lot of interaction with them that pertain to the story. Without giving it away, like we'll have a lot of the city built for the film itself.
Oh, wow.
And so we'll see Penrose Intelligence's HQ, we'll see Cassandra's HQ, we'll see the government capital, we'll see the council that leads the government, and it'll it'll be a huge effort, very very simply put. But we are extremely excited for the series. Like, we've never done something like this before, and we've done like, okay, so I worked on LPD files as my first project,
Mm.
but it was not nearly to the scale of what we're doing. The series is episodic. It'll roughly have between 7 to 10 episodes, is my guesstimate, basically.
Mm.
And it'll be very involved and have like a lot of voice actors that will be pulled in for this, a lot of like custom character outfits and designs for it, world designs, and yeah, a lot of plot.
Oh wow. So how long do you anticipate each episode being?
Ooh, yeah. So I, just looking at the timeline breakdown that I've kind of put together with it, we do actually anticipate these episodes being between 15 to 25 minutes each. So
Okay.
kind of similar to like a normal like anime or show episodic structure. And that's kind of without the like the opening and ending parts. Like, like anime have like OP and EDs, like the opening music and like ending screens. It'll probably be about 20 minutes average
Okay.
each episode.
Wow.
And obviously like 7 to 10 episodes.
Oh wow. Eh, How much work into the storyboarding does it take in order to get into the scripting phase? Because I remember when you and I talked about this before, as well as this, it sounds like you guys put a lot of effort in world lore and planning out the entire world before you got to this point. Yeah, I'll leave it there before I make it more convoluted than it should be.
Oh yeah. So after Emergence, we sat down and said, okay, we need to put together a world like lore document essentially. And so after the Penrose Protocol, we kind of just wrote up a little bit about the world lore that allows us to write Emergence. But with this, we're defining all the rules of the world.
Mm.
We're designing like its structure, like which like city district has what. We're designing the government structure, the policing structure, like we're literally just designing the existence of New York City, but with our city, because we need to make sure that the series has a grounded like rule with all of its lore.
Hmm.
And so, as to avoid like accidentally writing something that doesn't make sense in the world, we put like a whole document together that details every aspect of that world.
Hmm.
And so from that point, we then moved into the like overall writing, and this is kind of like the overarching process of writing that we took with the series. It's a lot more like intense and a lot more detailed. Is we then kind of sat, what do we want out of the series? Like, what's the message we want? What's the morals of the series? What's the themes? And overall, like, what do we want? And so we took a lot of time to do that. And once we reached that stage, we went into like the overarching, like, okay, what are the big picture items? Like, what's the main conflict? What are the sub conflicts? What are the characters? And kind of detailed those. And then after that, we went into the timelining where we started saying, okay, this will happen, this will happen, this will happen in chronological order. To help put together the details of like, okay, what does our series entail? And that's kind of where we're at right now, is we're roughly like 60-70% done with that side, is the timelining. And so after we do the timeline, we then get into the storyboard, where we then break down like specific scenes in detail, right? And that will include like separating each episode out very defined, like what happens in each episode, and obviously each scene. And once we storyboard everything, we'll then move into scripting, and that will be a pain to do because we're not writing one short film anymore. We're writing an 8-episode, roughly like episodic series. And so it's, what is it, February? Yeah, it's February. So it's taken about 2 months to get from the like inception of world writing to the middle of timelining where we're at right now. And I envision that it'll probably take another 2 or 3 months just to finish the major writing, including like scripting. But thankfully, we're not just gonna only do that while we're like, I guess, progressing. Pretty soon here, we're gonna put together all the avatar designs and characters. But we'll also start the world building, world creation and development alongside our writing. And so, kind of the plan here is like basically when we're done scripting, we'll have the avatars ready for us, we'll have the worlds ready for us, and we just go right into it. Start filming.
So I have another technical question based on the topic. How is a script different from like something else you would read, like a story or whatever? How do they differ in how they read and translate?
Yeah. So the script tells not only the details of exactly what you're going to do on set, but it also gives like dialogue, gives like camera design or not camera design, cinematography, and it basically just details everything. Not just for me though, but for the actors, for the voice actors, for the camera people. So a script has a couple different aspects. It has the dialogue that characters will say to each other. There's oftentimes cinematography that will be seen. It also tells like shot locations and like scene changes and like all that sort of stuff, and does it all in the order that you would see on screen. And
Mm.
so a script is essentially whatever's on screen, but just in writing format.
Mm.
And so by having the script done, we'll be able to know exactly what we're doing on set.
Oh, good to know. I personally have never seen or read a script, so thank you for explaining that. I now know. Thank you. I learned a thing.
Yee.
Yee. Wow. And thank you so very much for coming down and talking with us. It's been an absolute pleasure learning from you. You should, as soon as this is over, if you haven't watched it yet, go watch the stuff. Where can people find the stuff if they haven't done it yet? I'm looking at you.
Ooh, yeah. So our YouTube channel is at Studio Penrose. That's where we upload like all of the films and all of the like other content. I actually have been posting a lot in community tab. 'Cause, like I like posting these polls and stuff because it's kind of fun to see what people's like thoughts are on certain things. Like I post polls on like film related topics just because it's it's fun. But you'll find all that stuff there on the YouTube. We also have a Twitter called Penrose Pictures. And on that you can find like all of the group updates, like any information about like the studio. Once the film series gets close to production, or rather filming, we'll do like casting calls and stuff like that. You'll find updates for like DAing, like voice acting, casting calls as well as body acting casting calls. There's also like event information on that Twitter that we post. Then you'll find all that stuff on there.
Okay.
You can also find my Twitter, Khangaluwu, and that's usually filled with a lot more like community-oriented stuff. So another thing I do is I'm part of the Filmmakers of VRChat Group, which is a group that's dedicated to helping new filmmakers kind of learn the ropes of VRChat filmmaking. And so I run workshops as well, and you'll find like information about all that stuff on my Twitter.
Hmm.
And I guess lastly, we have a VRChat group. It is PNRS.8996, and that's more for events and stuff like that and filming. But if you're interested, you can join that group because more people in the VRChat group's kind of fun, you know.
Indeed. Again, thank you again for giving us your time. It's been an absolute pleasure
Yes.
getting to speak and learn from you.
Pleasure.
Raptor, you know
Yeah,
the
of course,
thing.
it's
There is.
awesome.
Oh.
Uh-huh. Well, on that, folks, no matter what, if you got your coffee in the morning or just a donut that you wish, you could be like we are, being on an island. And you never know. You might be the pirate that's a hot dog in a bun going, "Arr." You have a good one, folks, because guess what? Anything can happen in VR. Take care. Talk to you later. Bye.